Good morning and welcome to this morning's virtual walk around the parish of Bagendon. And as you can see from the first slide, this is one of several walks that I've described in a little booklet, which is available either by filling in an order form on the Churn Valley website or just pick one up in church when they're open again. The Churn Valley Way runs from Seven Springs in the north, which some people argue is the true source of the River Thames, all the way down the valley to Cirencester. And about half the route consists of quiet country lanes and bridleways, so it can be done on a mountain bike, but then you're stuck with having to push the bike along the footpaths. Well, the Churn Valley Way takes in 6 parish churches with diversions to 3 others, including Bagendon, which you can see towards the bottom of that map. There's a red dotted line that shows the route going through some wild open spaces between Bagendon and Woodman Court, and then it returns along a narrow country lane. Well, as in previous talks like this, I've done some statistics and a brief description of the route. And if we were to start at the parish church, then the circular route would be about 4¼ miles. But this morning I'm proposing that we'll start down at Peretz Brook at the end of the Churn Valley, well, branching off from the Churn Valley Way. And to do this walk properly, you need 2 maps because unfortunately there's a divide, as you can see by that red line. Those who were on the call a couple of weeks ago may remember that the Churn Valley Way meets the Welsh Way, as it's called, at Perrotts Brook. And looking in the other direction, there's the River Churn, and the bridge apparently has been in that position since at least the 12th century. I assume it's been repaired a few times since then. Just off to one side, there's a very nice house which sits alongside the river. But continuing along the road, going to the west, then you meet the A435. And I've been reading up about it, and since at least 1400s, the Welsh Way, slightly different spelling, provided the main route for drovers of cattle and sheep from Wales to London. I think they got as far as Lechlade and they loaded them onto barges. Well, up to 2,000 animals might be driven along that route from Wales, and the local farmers had to watch out for drovers putting their animals in a field overnight, because with that number of animals they would eat the field bare. Anyway, over on the left you'll see I've circled a big building which is known as the Bear Inn, and there's a little story here that's of quite a bit of interest. In 1685 or thereabouts, Sir John Guise of Rentham repeatedly got into a feud with his neighbour, Sir Robert Aitkins of Sapperton, and they had an argument during a card game and decided the only way to settle it was going outside into the nearby meadow. And there Sir Robert ran his sword right through Sir John, according to the rector, and it came right out of his back. He fell to the ground, presumably dead, but somehow he survived and he lived literally to fight another day. So the Bear Inn now is actually an antiques centre, so I believe anyway. Little bit back down the road, right where we first arrived at that junction, there's a gate which goes through into the field, but I was quite curious to see this strange looking antenna, which I've highlighted with another red circle. Nobody I've spoken to so far has been able to identify what it's for. Rather mysterious, but probably something to do with BT, who knows. Anyway, going across that field, after about less than 5 minutes of walking, you arrive at this lane, which if you were to follow it in the direction I'm looking at now, you'd end up at Woodman Court. But there's a slight dogleg in the route there, which gets us onto this metalled road heading towards Bagendon. And here's this lovely secluded shallow valley. It's been admired for many centuries. Long before the Roman invasion, this valley was an important centre for the ancient British Deboni tribe. So it's about 3/4 of a mile to go along the road there carefully. There's not many cars, and you should come into Bagendon. But referring to how things were back in 2,000 years or so ago, there were some big defensive ditches built around this this town. These are shown here by the black lines you can see on the map. There has been several archaeological excavations in the fields alongside the road there, and these are some examples of what's been found. Some gold coins, presumably that's the emperor's head there, a plain safety pin type brooch, which I think they found 70 of those in the fields around Bagendon, various skulls and other things, and I think there was a mint actually for producing coins, and the full collection is in the Corinium Museum. And you'll notice it's called the Bagendon Oppidum, which is Latin for an ancient Celtic fortified town, especially one under Roman rule. So I get the impression, and I've not researched it, that the locals didn't put up too much of a fight when the Romans arrived, and they were quickly integrated. Well, I think it was about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, the University of Durham came to Bagendon, and for about a week or so they dug some trial pits in the field there, and several members of the local community got involved. Didn't actually see a final report, but it wasn't quite as fruitful a digging as some of the previous ones, but anyway, it was quite a bit of interest. So further on down the road, we're coming into the village now. It has been described as one of the prettiest villages in the Cotswolds, I think quite deservedly. And if you look carefully, you can see what looks like a water wheel on the side of the mill, just to the left of the picture. It's hard to imagine a more idyllic country church than St Margaret's, Bagendon. The location is pure magic, one of the loveliest spots in the Cotswolds. And that's it. I just caught the church when the sunlight was in the right position to show it at its best. Now I've got one or two stories here from a book written by a vicar in the early 1900s. There's a description of the previous vicar, the Revd J.L. Bythesey, who was vicar from 1800 to 1845. And just a quote, "When he was nearly 80, he used to ride around the farm on a shaggy and ancient pony, or sit in his study, trumpet to the ear, giving impatient audience to grey-haired housekeeper Betty Townsend, or the curate Henry Bubb, bringing details of parish work needed to the rector's sanction, and staying afterwards to 3 o'clock dinner, with a game of chess to follow." Well, sadly, those of us who are clergy now lament that era has long passed and our lives are somewhat more hectic. And here's another little story. The Reverend Blythesey had a curate, I just mentioned, the Reverend Henry Bubb, whose younger brother had been estranged from the rector for many years. Well, as you can read for yourself, the younger brother was anxious to be reconciled, so he came by the Bath coach to Peretz Brook one hot July day and walked from the Bear Inn and found that the rector and curate were sitting down to dinner, and he was asked to join them. But no sooner had he taken his seat than, overcome by the heat of the walk, and I might add perhaps some stress, he fell dead in his chair. Naturally, the curate, the brother, was very shocked, but the rector was for going on with the dinner. "Take a glass of wine, Henry, the man's dead." "No, sir," said the curate, and rather loath, the old rector had to leave the table while the decencies were observed. When it became a question of burial in the chancel, the immemorial place for interment of the rectors was decided upon. But Mr. Bubb, who had expressed his doubt about whether a sufficient room could be found, had been bidden to go and look. He returned, saying that it was chock full. "Tut, tut, Henry, scrabble them all to one side, and while you're doing it, make room for me too," said the Reverend Blithesea. So I think that's a real gem of a story. Anyway, more seriously, the Bagendon Parish Church is dedicated to St Margaret of Antioch. There's a depiction of her there as a sketch, but also wearing a red cloak in the east window. Rather beautiful church, lots of light at the sanctuary end, which makes it very attractive. And this must have been during a harvest festival. And there's a fragment of the original stained glass window showing the Blessed Virgin Mary, and if you look carefully, you can see her hands are outstretched and reaching towards us. A friend of mine, Pete Ryder, who lives in Northumberland, was keen to have a look round the parish church, and while he was there, we had permission from the wardens to enter behind the closed doors at the tower end, and there we found various pieces of rock and carvings which Peter's described in these sketches. I don't think these have ever been published anywhere, at least not yet, so they seem to be of great significance to Pete, but he is rather keen on things like this. Medieval cross slab grave covers are his speciality, actually. But in the churchyard, there's a more modern headstone, and this one's to Pilot Officer David Jenkins, who was shot down during action over Surrey in August 1940. And sadly, he died when only aged 21 and his body was brought back here to Bagendon. Well, the two wardens, Gillen and Allison, who were very active and have managed to persuade, I think, over 40 local people to go on the electoral roll, which is a great example to some of our other church wardens, I believe. Quite a strong social life in Bagendon, and they have a really gifted organist, Tony Hymas, who's played with some of very high-profile rock bands going back to the 70s, and he gave a concert a couple of years ago in aid of the church. And then a local celebrity, actor, comedian and author Ben Miller, and you may see him roundabout. I've never come across him yet, but he must be known to those who live nearby. And this is a reminder that Pauline often is out on her own picking up litter, but on this particular occasion, she managed to win over the commitment of the Bishop of Tewkesbury, Robert Springett, who came along and helped with this very worthwhile cause. Good of Pauline to be doing that quietly behind the scenes. And then we had the diocesan bishop, Rachel Treweek, came to visit us a couple of years ago. And there's our rector on the right-hand side, David Minns, who took the role of deacon for her on that day. Anyway, that's enough about the church. I think we'll carry on up the side of the old school, going west out of the village. Another continuation of the lovely secluded valley, very pastoral scene. Some more houses scattered around, and eventually you come to this sharp turning in the road, and it's there that a path goes off to the left into a field, and then down the lane at that very point where the sharp corner is, some riders. But we're heading up into the field here, and it was July when Margaret and I first walked through here, and you can't see the wildflowers very well, but there were butterflies dancing all over the place. It was a pure delight for us to walk for that quarter of a mile or so and then up into the woodland. Some renovation was going on in a massive house that's tucked away in the woodland there, and the footpath actually goes very steeply up to the side there. I don't know if you can see a little blue arrow there. So it's a bridleway and it goes up to the right. And if you were to look from way above, then you'll see we've come from Peretz Brook up to Bagendon, through the fields, and then there's some woodland with 2 vertical lines, and that's where the big house is. And there's a little road that then goes up that driveway. It's all open to the public, of course. And then you're at the edge of a massive quarry, Daglingworth Quarry. I thought it might be just worth mentioning that Daglingworth Quarry is of great interest to geologists because of the fossils which can be found there. Obviously, you can't just scramble down into the quarry. I don't know too much about it, but it's one of my ambitions. One of the things on my bucket list will be to go there with a guided group one day. Anyway, the Welsh Way that we talked about earlier as a drover's route from Wales to London is now met at the top of that lane from the woodland. Continuing along there, there's an absolute abundance of wildflowers in July. At least that's how Margaret and I found it. And I'm sure there's an orchid there, the purple one. I could easily be corrected later on. But if those who've got an interest in wildflowers, I can't think of a better place to visit than that Welsh Way up above Bagendon. After about half a mile, the little country lane goes under the A417, but the route that Margaret and I took goes through to the right to Darley Farm. And on this map, if you look over near the double red lines, you'll see Darley Farm. And the route is reasonably well marked through the farm buildings. It's actually the Macmillan Way, which is linked in with the cancer charity, a fundraising venture for them. And it goes down into a very secluded valley and then rises up again at Woodman Court. So just a few pictures of the route along there. Very pleasant on a sunny day. There's the farm buildings in the distance. Rob and I cycled it in the other direction a couple of weeks ago. It's very pleasant. There must be a problem with lorries or cars coming in the other direction because they've put up this notice that warning people not to try and get any further towards Darley Farm because the route is quite narrow and there's quite a fragile looking bridge about halfway along. And just before reaching Woodman Court, there's this lovely old house called Moor Wood, and there they've got apparently the National Collection of Rambler Roses. I've just dropped a picture in at the side there so you can see the sort of thing that's able to be admired. And it's open during the summer months and quite a modest admission fee, £5. So I think Margaret and I will go along there this summer, all being well. The route goes up through the gardens and emerges in Woodman Court. That's looking into the village, but turning back the other way, you'll see you've emerged through those white gates and then turn sharp right, ignoring the sign which goes down to North Cerney and carrying on towards Bagendon, which is only 1.5 miles away. Some more horses in the fields there, look very contented. After about 1/4 mile or so, then there's another turning down to the right and fantastic views out across the fields to the west. It really does feel like you've got the whole world at your feet going across here. And even though it's a public road, it's very quiet Goes like that for probably about a mile or so, and then you start to enter Bagendon. If you were to turn down to the right there, you'd come to the buildings that I mentioned previously on the sharp bend, but our route continues along this altitude, passing another massive house, and just around the corner. Oh, I should just say that we have an annual Good Friday Walk of Witness, and that comes over the hill from North Cerney. There's just a couple of pictures. And I should say that the route from North Cerney enters here by the War Memorial. The War Memorial is very attractive, and for those who've got time or interest, you might like to have a closer look at that. These days, with Ancestry websites and other things, you can learn a lot from tracing these men who sadly lost their lives defending our country all those years ago. Well, we're nearly at the end of the virtual tour, and there's the old rectory. Not far down the hill, past the thatched cottage on the right, and we're back at the church where we spent some time earlier. And just a bird's eye view again, would just be a matter really of retracing steps back down the valley to Peretz Brook.